Episode 56, A Final Breath. Luigi could hear exciting cheering from outside of the tent. Waluigi was telling a dramatized account of the Mushroom Resistance's history, from the time Luigi had taken out the Koopas bullying Cobalt to the battle on Pilo Island. The air was filled with the whir of propellers and the hum of engines. The entire fleet was here, several thousands strong. Mario yawned and scratched the back of his head.
Wow, bro, brings you back, right?
He chuckled.
Reminds me of the Star Festival, doesn't it?
Luigi grinned and nodded.
They're all so happy to have the princess and you back, Mario,
he said, clapping his shorter brother on the shoulder.
The whole world was waiting for you.
Mario smiled and clenched his hand into a fist.
Then I'll give 'em what they want,
Mario exclaimed passionately.
They want to see a Super Mario run in and stomp Bowser, don't they? Well, I'm not going to disappoint.
Luigi chuckled at his brother's typical optimistic tone. There was still an entire army and thousands of battleships preparing to face off against them, but Mario could make it seem like the worst they had to deal with was a bumbling trio of Goombas. Mario's face grew more emotional.
You know, Luigi, I haven't really had time to thank you,
he said.
When everyone thought I was dead, you stood up and became the hero I always knew you could become, bro. Peach told me some stories. Fighting Roy on top of a city? Battling Bowser Jr. on an airship 1,000 miles above the ocean? What happened to my timid little brother?
Luigi laughed, feeling his face grow red with embarrassment.
I'm just glad we can fight together again, Mario. You still remember those bros attacks?
Mario gave Luigi a thumbs up.
Burned into my brain deeper than a Monty Mole in mud, Luigi. When Bowser sees us leaping towards them, he might get so scared he'll give up. That's my Mario.
Luigi grinned. Mario turned away and faced the golden lamplight spilling out of the tent flap.
Okay, Luigi, let's give the crowd a show.
With that, the Mario brothers walked out of the tent, and mounted the wooden steps to the hastily constructed stage. Waluigi, in the middle of over-emotionally describing the intense expressions on Luigi's faces as he faced down his mind-controlled brother on top the Seven Stars ship, hastily apologized to his audience and leapt into the crowd with one leap of his long legs. The light was so bright it was almost blinding. Every inch of the hollow was filled with a person, people representing every race from every corner of the mushroom world. The starlit sky was full of warships, and Luigi could see more people crowding the decks. Everyone was shouting.
Mario! Luigi!
It was unimaginably loud, but also unimaginably exciting. Mario leapt into the air, doing a spin, before landing on his feet and waving at the ground.
Yeah, it's me, Mario!
He exclaimed, to thunderous applause. Luigi, content to finally be out of the stress and glamour of the spotlight, smiled and clapped politely. Mario had always been better at things like this.
Sorry I haven't been around to see it all, but Luigi, Peach and the others tell me you've all been real heroes, standing up to Bowser and the others. Some of the things you've done. Mamma mia, even I'd be afraid. But thanks to you, we're finally at this point. We're ready to storm Bowser's castle.
Everybody cheered. Some people leapt up and down, while fireworks displaying symbols like mushrooms, stars, and fire flowers boomed in the sky. Even a massive red one displaying Mario's face lit up the sky, to gasps of awe.
Thank you for the rousing speech, Mario.
Luigi heard Peach's voice as she approached them from the left, making her way to a microphone.
It's nothing, princess.
Mario chuckled.
People of the Mushroom Kingdom and beyond.
Peach addressed them. Luigi looked at her face. It was serene and overjoyed with pride for her people. She hadn't looked this happy, he thought, since the day of her wedding.
I offer you my humble thanks. This rebellion was created by the efforts of Luigi, a man who has proved himself again and again, but it was not simply his work. We are where we are today because of all of you. Each and every one of you became a hero by choosing to put your life on the line to fight against the tyranny of the Koopa Empire, its successor the Neo Empire, and the criminal organization 7 Stars. I ask you to hold on for just a little longer. As soon as the light of the sun stretches onto our camp, we will fly for Koopa Central and defeat both Bowser and Ludwig for good. Stay safe, but fight bravely. Every man and woman's courage and spirit is needed if we're to finally defeat the Koopa troop once and for all. All of you!
Mario shouted.
Be like Luigi. If you need tips on how to be brave, look at him. He's become a full-fledged superstar now. No need to think of him as just
my brother.
We're both equals. Come here, Luigi.
Then, as he walked forward, Mario embraced him in full view of the thousands watched. Luigi felt a tear drip down onto his shoulder.
Mario.
He protested.
No. You know I get emotional when things like this happen.
Mario drew away, although the tears were already dripping from Luigi's blue eyes. He gazed over the crowd. There was Cobal, the person who had given him the spirit to stand up and fight, sitting on a barrel with his shades on trying to look cool, like always. Prince Peasley, hero of the Bean Kingdom, Strike, the Koopa Troop defector and K. Rool, Donkey Kong's old arch-nemesis, hurling his crown into the air with joy while his 2 cronies Clump and Crusha applauded behind him. There were Toadette and Captain Toad, embracing each other and cheering, and Toad Bert, Billy, Bank Toad and Male Toad, laughing at their leader's dramatic gesture of affection. Luigi saw the Kongs, Diddy riding on Donkey Kong's shoulder, Wario and Waluigi, whose laughs were so loud they could be heard over the clamor. He saw Dream Bert, Toadsworth, and the Great Gonzales Jr. and all of Mario's other old partners. Koops stood by his wife Koopy-Koo and his 2 children, behind him were the Glitz Pit Fighters, his old elite squad from the Koopa Troop that he had brought over. Suddenly Luigi didn't care if they saw him cry. He had come this far with all these people. Tomorrow, whatever happened, they'd face the end together. Ludwig leaned back on his throne on the Symphony of Destruction's bridge, watching the night skies with a smug smile. The bridge, compared the more militaristic designs on his other ships, designed with an artistic attention to detail. It really looked more like a ballroom than a command bridge, really. Ludwig's throne sat on a dais on the back of the room overlooking the marble flooring etched with the Neo Empire's emblem, while at the front of the room before the massive window that stretched outward, his pilots worked holographic control panels from comfortable seats. They wore blue uniforms and grey flight caps with his emblem, making them look far more official than the usual Koopa Cruiser crew. The sky was full of battleships, both the sleek Airship Mark III's and the Airship Mark II's, which bore the designs of Wendy, Roy and Larry in addition to his. That would change once the war was over, they had all betrayed him in the end. Not like that mattered to him, sharing power had never been in his nature. From his place on his golden throne, Ludwig could see every turret and bill blaster, every banner blowing in the wind, every engine roaring with power. This was his army, his empire, his world. For decades Ludwig had worked for this, scheming, plotting, building to bring down his father and all who supported him.
Mother!
Ludwig thought as he closed his eyes, leaning back on his throne, the poignant tones of a symphony running through his mind.
Watch over me from above. When I am emperor, I will be a man you would have been proud to call your son.
Antonio could hear the bustling in the headquarters even from the comfort of his office, although he will still allowed at least the pretense of silence. His chair was turned slightly as he gazed through the massive window into the base's center, which was empty for the first time since its construction. Every member of all the 7 divisions had been ordered into the assembly hall. There was no need to keep guards behind at the headquarters. It was worthless now, as the organization's purpose was about to be fulfilled. It was a pity that only he, his brother, and Skulls remained of the board of directors. While none of the others had ever been fully devoted to the plan, they had been good commanders at the best of times. While he had not fully raised anybody to their positions, their divisions had been left under the commands of their highest-ranking subordinates. He wanted 7 stars to be out in full force. There were 2 new recruits, as well. Fortuga's Flame of Kupa High Command, and, even more surprisingly, Prince Larry Kupa. He did not trust either of them, but it was not in his nature to turn down 2 potential assets. Their abilities had been assessed, and they'd both been given the rank of Captain, Flame, in the Red Star's forces, and Larry, in the Green. He had thought that their leadership skills warranted a command. Even Flame, who had been a good soldier once, before his ego had consumed him. But he did not dare give them more than 1 ship to command. It didn't matter, anyways. Nothing could stop his plan now. Antonio heard the door slide open, and Giovanni entered.
Antonio!
He said softly.
It's time.
Antonio rose.
So it is, Giovanni.
He said, striding towards him.
The conclusion of our lives' great work, dating back to before the Kupa War.
He smiled slightly.
The mushroom world, as we know it, is coming to an end.
Giovanni nodded.
Let's go,
he said. The brothers strode through the darkened corridor. Images flashed before Antonio's mind. The face of his wife, the fires and carnage of the Kupa War, his old friend Morton's face as he bore down upon him, flames trailing from his fist. It was over. The Comet Observatory was only a day away. The starfall would happen, and a world of silence would be all that remained. The massive doors at the end of the balcony slid open. A massive cheer went up from the room as Antonio stepped onto the balcony. The room was massive, like a huge, circular stadium, so large that Antonio could barely see to the end of it. Covering every inch were uniformed soldiers, assembling in order of their color, so the room seemed to be striped with purple, green, silver, gold, blue, red, and orange. Skulls, who had already been on the balcony, gave them a nod as Antonio stepped to the front, his 2 chief subordinates flanking him.
Today is a day of end,
Antonio exclaimed.
The end of the Mushroom Kingdom, and the Kupa Kingdom. The end of wishes, and magic, of great minds, great heroes, and great villains.
Antonio paused for a moment, as Skulls glanced at him.
The command ship has been prepared, Grand Star,
he said quickly.
The rest of our fleet is ready to be boarded. We will have an armada that is powerful enough to destroy the Kupa Empire, the Neo Empire, and the Mushroom Resistance at once, to ensure no one will interfere with the starfall once they've all assembled at the right spot. Excellent.
Antonio nodded. Everything had gone according to plan. The armies would meet at Kupa Central, each thinking only about their own glory. When in reality, they would all be clustering together, making them easy to be wiped out in one fell swoop. And so would end the lives of all the world's heroes and villains, all who had the power to change the course of history.
Today,
he announced to the massive army assembled before him,
we take our first steps into a new era.
Cammy sat on a nameless mountain somewhere west of the Snow Kingdom, huddling her robes around herself as she looked out over the endless forest before her. She sat by a small fire, bathing her in a ring of light that kept the oppressive darkness at bay. The stars and the moon shone down above her. Cammy wondered if the star sprites were watching as she worked to bring the evil they had sealed away back in the world. The dark star was destroyed, and would never return, but some of its power had still lingered. In the small black cauldron above Cammy's fire, the potion bubbled, thick and purple. It had a foul, evil smell that hung around the cliff and made Cammy wrinkled up her nose, but she continued to stir. If Emperor Bowser drank this potion, the dark power that had once flowed through the dark star would flow through him. It would restore him to the strength of his youth, removing all that the long years of neglect had done to his body. Furthermore, it would also make Bowser powerful, more powerful than he had ever been, except perhaps when he had briefly fused with the Dream Stone on Pylo Island long ago. Bubbles in the potion popped. An icy wind blew past Cammy, fanning the flames. A snowflake fell upon her nose. It was going to be a long night, but for Bowser, it would be the last long night. She grinned to herself. Bowser had never been kind to her, but she had always been loyal, and there was a sort of grudging affection between them. To her, Bowser was a spoiled, willful son of sorts, although she doubted he saw her in any sort of motherly way. It didn't matter, though. Emperor Bowser would brood upon his throne no more. With this power, he'd smash his enemies and finally take Princess Peach for his wife. At long last. It was dark in the Imperial Citadel's throne room. Most of the lights were off, meaning that it was only lit by a faint orange glow from the lava lake that filled most of the room, the throne, and the bridge leading to it suspended high above. From the comfort of the Koopa throne, Bowser could just make out the stained glass windows that ringed the enormous, circular chamber, each one showing him in some moment of power. The Koopa Emperor slouched, resting his head on his hand. The throne room was silent and empty, save for the bubbling of the lava. So this was it, then. A lifetime of battles and amazing, completely awesome moments. He had been fighting since he had barely been 4. He had smashed the Shroobs when he had only been 8, he had broken into Star Haven and ripped the Star Rod from the Star Spirit's hands, he had taken his shot at dominating the universe itself. He had even, in a strange twist of fate, fulfilled an ancient prophecy and saved the multiverse from total annihilation. He had defeated his longtime foe, taken over the world, made an empire that outshined all others. Truly, he was a Koopa among Koopas, a king greater than his father, or his grandfather, or even Koopazaroth, the legendary founder of the Koopa Kingdom over 1,000 years ago. Power and money sure were useless. Bowser wished the nations of the world had put up more of a fight. After the Mushroom Kingdom was dealt with, only the Metro Kingdom, with its advanced military, had given his own forces a challenge. Perhaps he could have had more heart-stopping fights if he had chosen to expand his empire into space, but there really wasn't much point in fighting for fighting's sake, right? Bowser sat on the Koopa throne, huge and covered with gold and jewels and spikes, but there should have been 2 thrones in this room. The other, he imagined, would have been smaller, daintier, less spikes and more flowers. Bowser hated flowers, but he knew quite a bit about them. There had been a time where he thought that winning the prince's heart was as simple as finding the right construction of a bouquet. On the throne's headrest there would be a mushroom carved out of gold, surrounded by spikes to symbolize their union. Then they'd hold court together. Cool, right? He had never admitted it to himself, but Bowser had been starting to believe that the love of his life really had been dead. Until she had suddenly reappeared. 20 years later, Bowser had been less than a dead Koopa walking, but now, the old fire was back within him. Peach was back. Which meant he still had a chance. He'd disciple this rebellious son of his, make the Mushroom Kingdom understand it was now just a part of his empire, and then sit back and grow old with the woman he loved beside him. Maybe he would travel into space and add a couple new planets to his dominion. He hadn't fought anybody hand-to-hand since the Battle of Toad Town. It would be good to make sure that the old flame pipe in his lungs was still roaring away. For the briefest of moments, Bowser imagined another throne at his side. One that was smaller than his, yes, but no less intimidating, fitting her very spirit. Maybe he'd have some floating stuff on it or something. She'd always seemed to enjoy magic. He bet that if she'd still been alive, his children wouldn't have grown up to be such brats. Ludwig wouldn't have gone off and tried to start his own empire.
Empress Lavaria Koopa,
Bowser thought to himself, before he shook his head instantly. No. Even more than 30 years later, it was still too painful. His first love was dead, and owing to the mysterious laws of the afterlife, not even all the wishes in the world could bring her back. Both Cammy and Kamek had made that clear to him when he had first announced his intentions to steal the Star Rod. That had been brave of them. Any lesser Koopa would have faced the dungeons for even mentioning the Queen's name. Light poured into the throne room as the huge doors creaked open, and Bowser Jr. came stomping over the bridge. Bowser smiled. Jr. His favorite son was a splitting image of himself at that age. He had to be around the age he had been when he had first fought Mario now, wouldn't he? Huh. He had grown up exactly the way his old pops had wanted. Bowser Jr. was still single, though. That was something he'd advise his son on, once the war was over. Junior would be emperor one day, and he'd need an heir. Once the war was over, he'd be all full of romance since he'd have Peach by his side, so he'd be sure to offer his kid great dating advice. That was what dads were for, right?
Dad! They're all ready, like you wanted,
Bowser Jr. said as he approached the throne. Bowser grunted in agreement. Lately, Bowser Jr. had been uncharacteristically glum. He hoped the end of the war would restore his light-hearted spirit. Dark and brooding emperors were boring, and they had a tendency to be overthrown by heroes more often than not, when didn't bode well for the continuation of his dynasty.
Great! Guess I better head on over and give them a good old-fashioned Bowser speech, huh?
Bowser Jr. cracked a smile.
That's what they're waiting for, Dad. The elite force, all of my armies, Iggy's, Morton's, and Lemmy's. Wendy showed up too, although she didn't have any troops with her. She's done with Ludwig. There are rumors. I know.
Bowser growled. He had heard that supposedly his son Roy was dead, murdered by his own brother. If that was true, he'd be a micro-Goomba. Roy was tough, even for a royal-blooded Koopa. If he could survive falling into a collapsing star, Roy could survive the explosion of his battleship. It didn't matter, though. He'd worry about Roy later, especially since his hot-blooded son had lent his support to Ludwig. With a grunt, Bowser rose to his feet and left the throne, joining Junior as they walked down the long bridge over the lava, lined with spikes.
You're a good kid, son,
he said, patting Bowser Jr. on the back.
And you'll make a great emperor. Thanks,
Bowser Jr. replied. Bowser sighed as they passed through the massive green metal door and through a hall lined with golden statues of himself and lit with torches that cast shadows on the red drapes that hung on the walls. He remembered the day he had become a father, when Lavaria had held that tiny Koopa baby with a shock of blue hair.
You know, this is really all your old papa's fault,
Bowser admitted, awkwardly as they continued down the silent hallway, their footsteps echoing through the castle. He was Lord Bowser, he never made mistakes. But Bowser Jr. deserved this, if anyone did.
You were never the heir, Ludwig always was. If your mother had still been alive, she would have stopped me. No wonder he ended up so rotten, being passed up just 'cause you reminded me of me the most.
Bowser Jr. nodded.
He talked about it, sometimes, back when we all still got along.
Bowser Jr. admitted.
I think he never disliked me, at least not when we were all kids and fighting Mario together, but I could see he was always full of great ideas and bitter he'd never be able to make them happen. There were times when
Bowser growled and shook his head.
Kamek used to always tell me you can't change the past. Or at least it's really not advisable to do so.
He said, still feeling uncomfortable about being this apologetic.
Maybe Ludwig should be sitting on the throne, but what the heck? I'd rather have you on it, because you're my loyal kid and you would never do anything like try to overthrow your old dad, or blow up your brother. The people don't need the great demon King Koopa anymore. They're tired of him. They need somebody who understands them more, not someone like me or Ludwig but someone like you.
Bowser Jr. smiled warmly, and then he quite suddenly hugged his father. Bowser's eyes widened in surprise. Bowser Jr. had never hugged him before, at least not like this, because he had always been too small.
Thanks, King Dad.
Bowser Jr. smiled.
We'll face Ludwig together.
A massive roar went up from the army as Emperor Bowser stepped onto the balcony, his cape flying behind him. Morton, Iggy, Lemmy, and Grand General Sheldon met him. The sky was full of battleships stretching all the way to the horizon, each one of them dwarfed by the enormous Koopa dominance, a castle built into a ship's hull and covered in more guns than most nations had in their entire army. The entire outer courtyard of the Imperial Citadel was full of his minions, standing in formation, flags flapping in the wind.
Everyone's here, Emperor Bowser.
The Grand General said briskly, handing Bowser a piece of paper. Bowser looked it over. It was his speech, probably written by some professional speechwriter, full of stuff about honor and glory and duty and whatnot. Bowser blew on it, burning it to a crisp, before he stomped his foot onto the balcony's railing and roared into the sky, laughing.
Gway, ha 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 ha! Who's here? The king's here! That's right, the one and only Emperor Bowser! Tremble before me, underlings!
Everybody cheered as Bowser roared again, breathing fire into the air.
I heard a rumor that one of my kids thinks that he should be king. Stupid, right? I'm the only king around here. Actually, scratch that out, the only emperor. Yeah, emperor with a capital E. Who beat Mario? Who led you to victory? Who made you the finest batch of minions since the word minion was created? Come on, don't be shy, say my name. Long live Emperor Bowser!
Every throat screamed as one, hundreds of thousands of Koopas, Goombas, Shy Guys, Lackey 2s, Pokies and Spinies and Monty Moles and every single race who had ever fought under the banner of the Koopa troop. As the applause died away, music blared from the speakers as the army began the singing of the Koopa Kingdom's national anthem. Bowser laughed. Just a while ago, he had turned 50 and had felt a dry bones already. But now, the real Bowser was back.
You want my throne, Ludwig, Luigi, any other loser still kicking around? Fine. Come and get it.